Hey, what up, y'all? What up, what up? Thank you for tuning in on The Wandering Warrior. I'm Vincent, as the name somewhere will indicate. And, you know, I've been thinking recently, just because of the stuff that's been, online and how people have been framing things. I've been thinking about this question: what is a traditional martial art? Right? Because a lot of people would say I'm a traditionalist. They'd say, oh, you do praying mantis boxing, tanglang quan. So you do a traditional martial art. You practice with knives and clubs and machetes and swords and spears and shit. Not really spears much, but whatever. You do archery. Yeah, but also, at least when I was in the U.S., I practiced with guns too. Does that make me a traditionalist? I don't know. Um, so what is a traditional martial art? Like, the people oftentimes will say that boxing, wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai are modern martial arts. But what does that really mean? Because boxing is traditional as fuck. Boxing goes back to at least 1600s, if not earlier. Back when it was English people bare knuckle boxing each other, a little bit of clinch work and wrestling too, a little bit of low kicks. If you think about it, that sounds kind of like Southern Kung Fu, but whatever. And it's evolved because of the rules and the change in the society and all that into the sweet science, as we call it, of putting gloves on and knocking somebody the fuck out. And that's a beautiful thing. And it is a traditional martial art. And that tradition has evolved over time to meet the demand and the needs of the people as they see it. You know, yes, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu might be considered a modern martial art because it's internationalized and all that, but it comes from Judo, which is sort of a streamlining of old Jiu Jitsu. It comes from a very traditional lineage of martial arts that have gone from Japan to Brazil to worldwide, right? So, is it not traditional? It's an offshoot. It's a very successful offshoot. Um, Wrestling came from, as we know it today in the West, is from Greco-Roman wrestling that was sort of created, so to speak, in France based on the folk wrestling there. That means that there was a traditional wrestling that was going on, right? And they wanted to model after the virtues of what was perceived as the Greco-Roman era wrestling culture. But that was from, I think, the 1800s, so maybe not as traditional or as old as boxing. I don't know. And then you have other stuff like, say, uh, Chinese martial arts, Okinawan martial arts, Mongolian wrestling. Those are obviously traditional. That there's been a tradition for 4, 6, 7,000 years of people fighting each other a certain way, right? Absolutely traditional. So, what is a traditional martial art? Is it the whole like white people versus Orientalism type of uh, attitude? Not really, because again, boxing is old as fuck. It is a tradition, right? You can't say it's not. It absolutely is. So that kind of flies in the face of that. And then, is it sort of scientific versus dogmatic and traditional? Not really. Not really. Because science is really a symptom of the sort of technological development of the society. It doesn't really have to do with martial arts. I mean, you can use scientific principles to explain any of the martial arts. And all of these had evolved in early or pre-scientific days, right? So that doesn't really work. Is a traditional martial art, I don't know, um, international versus still rooted within the original culture? That that one could be. That one could be, right? Like Mongol wrestling is very much Mongolian wrestling. You could go learn it, but it's Mongolian wrestling. Whereas today's freestyle, Greco-Roman, etc., is definitely internationalized. But then what about judo? What about taekwondo? What about karate? Those have become internationalized as well. And yeah, they use sensei, they use dan, they use dojo. They use those terms, but a lot of the people practicing it don't speak Korean or Japanese or Ryukyuan/Okinawan languages. They speak their own languages, and they've adopted this martial culture into their own to a certain extent, right? So that's kind of halfway in between. Is that traditional? I mean, it comes from a traditional art. Is it still traditional if it's not in the original culture? Doesn't quite work. Doesn't quite work. What about context? What about traditional martial arts are for a traditional context? A context of battles, of people trying to kill you on the fucking street, or you getting ambushed in the fucking jungle. It doesn't have to be the jungle, but you get what I'm saying. And in that non-sporting context, the approach to martial arts is different. The mentality is different. Not better or worse, just better suited for a particular context. And that is the traditional context of people trying to murder each other on the regular. Your modern martial arts, like every time we think of modern martial arts, we think of those big four: Muay Thai, we think BJJ, we think Western wrestling, we think Western boxing. And all of these have been heavily sportified. Heavily sportified. Effective in the ring, effective within their sports, absolutely. No fucking doubt about it. With some modification, can be effective in real street violence situations, yeah. But then they start looking a lot like traditional martial arts. And so I think actually it has more to do, it's not so much East versus West, it's not so much rooted in the culture, although that's an aspect of it. I think traditional martial arts has to do with what was the ancient traditional role of martial war arts, martial skills, versus a more civilian friendly application of those similar moves and techniques, but with a different mindset. A 1v1, a situation with rules, a socially acceptable way to duke it out. Because at the end of the day, you know, an Uchimata done for the Olympics and an Uchimata done on the street when someone's trying to hack at you with a machete is not that different. But the type of awareness you need and your approach to training is going to be a bit different. And while the sporting world lacks the sort of do or die mentality and heavy emphasis on situational awareness that you have in sort of combat arts, the traditional arts, at the same time, the sporting world lets you pressure test your skills consistently. And you know, if you don't live in a violent environment where you're going to be forced to pressure test your skills consistently, the sporting world gives you a way to do that without getting an eye gouged out, without getting your balls ripped out, without getting your head chopped off. At the same time, the sporting world, as you can see with boxing, as you can see with BJJ, with Muay Thai, etc., there are certain moves that you just wouldn't and shouldn't do on the street. You just don't. But you can do them in the sport. You know. So I think really at the end of the day, traditional versus modern really comes more down to the context. Yes, modern tends to be more internationalized, tends to be a little less rooted in the culture unless you're actually in the country where it came from, or the nation or tribe. And traditional tends to be more rooted in the culture, but I think that part of that is because originally it was part of a culture. It was a culture's way of killing people and of not getting killed. And as that old form of combat subsided and militaries have moved to modern warfare, guns, missiles, tanks, the traditional combative arts have also taken on meanings of cultural significance, spiritual significance, communal significance, that the combat sports that have become more internationalized, Muay Thai, boxing, BJJ, wrestling as is done in the Olympics in America, Europe, etc., have taken on different set of meanings. And so when people say you do traditional martial arts or you do modern martial arts, it's not a perfect term. We always kind of know what they mean, and sometimes there's a sort of implication that the modern martial arts are superior and the traditional martial arts are not effective. It's really in how you train it. It's really in how you train it, and I think both worlds can learn from each other. And it's a shame that both worlds don't appreciate each other enough sometimes. But yeah, this is just something I was thinking about recently. Traditional versus modern. I mean, I have a modern mindset, but I do train traditional arts. What does it really mean? I enjoy competing, but I train in case somebody's trying to slit my throat. So, what does that mean? I guess that means I'm a martial artist. I'm a warrior. This is my mindset. This is my lifestyle. This is my journey. And I don't really like making a distinction. I just understand the usefulness of both mentalities. Anyways, enough rambling. Thank you so much for tuning in on my journey. I salute yours. Peace.